Hey, friends, welcome to another week of Wellness Wednesdays. Hey, I'm really glad that you guys are here. We're going to have a great conversation on tonight. But as you're coming on in, let me know one where you're chiming in from, state and city. Would love to greet you. And then also, if you know this conversation is going to be really important for you and people that you are connected with, I want you to share it. We share if we care here on Wellness Wednesdays. So, two things for me as you're coming on in, let me know where you're chiming in from, state and city. And then also do me a favor by sharing this broadcast. Uh, I think this conversation that we're going to have tonight is crucial to anybody, really. So, you definitely want to share it with your friends, your dog, your cat, family, cousins, Pookie, Ray Ray, all of them. Just kidding, but hope you guys have had a great week. I'm looking forward to having this conversation on tonight with our special guest. And so I'm going to give you guys a few more moments just to come on in and share from my end. This is going to be a great conversation. I've been looking forward to it. I love our guest. We have conversations again like this pretty frequently. And so I'm pretty stoked about our conversation on tonight. So again, as I always like to start by saying is introducing myself. If you don't know who I am, my name is James Perkins. I am a therapist and coach here in North Carolina, and I love what I do. I think it is a sacred task and a sacred privilege to enter into people's stories and to help them navigate life transitions and really helping them step more fully into the work that God has called them to do. Because we all have an assignment, we all have a place, and we all have a story that is still yet unfolding for a lot of us, for all of us, for that matter. So I love being a part of people's stories. And the reason I created Wellness Wednesdays was in part to extend the conversation that I have with clients. And because what I realized very soon is that a lot of the conversations I was having in my office virtually were conversations I think that benefited a wider majority of people. And I wanted to take that really and expose that in some shape or form to a wider audience. And so here comes Wellness Wednesdays, because I really believe that our thoughts and our emotions really have a significant impact on how our life turns out, on how our day turns out, really how each moment, to be honest with you, turns out. Because our thoughts and emotions, they're connected and they have history. Our thoughts and emotions have history. And so I wanted to create an opportunity for us to really get some tools and strategies to help us push forward. And so I'm glad you're here with me tonight. Again, this conversation that we're having tonight is going to be on discerning purpose in a pandemic. And so I'm grateful to get this conversation started very briefly. Again, thanks for joining us. If you're coming in or even coming by, joining by replay, we still want to know where you're chiming in from. If this is your first or second time, let me know. And we're going to have a great conversation on tonight. And so, again, tonight we're talking about discerning your purpose in a pandemic. And I can't think of a better person to have this conversation with than a dear brother and pastor of mine, my brother, Garland Dunlap. So I'm going to bring him online now, and we're going to get this show on the road.
Hey,
Garland,
James.
brother. Hey, brother, man. How we doing?
Man, and I'm doing great, and I'm so glad to be here. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. You and I have this conversation all the time. We
Yes.
have great conversations all the time, but like now we're doing it in front of a group of people.
Yes,
So.
now we're doing it in front of a group. This is like, I tell all my guests, I'm like, what we're really doing is bringing the conversations we normally have behind the scenes to the forefront. And so we're just having those conversations for everybody else to hear us talk about what we normally already talk about anyway.
Exactly.
So,
before we get started, I need to do honor to you because, so you and I have known each other basically since seminary.
yeah,
I think you were one of the first people that I met on campus where, developed a relationship with. And I have to tell you, there's only a few people. I find myself in a pastoral counseling space, and some people ask me, "Well, who do you go to for counseling?" and my answer is James, my friend James. Like when I need counseling, I call my friend James.
Yes, yes.
he digs me out of the hole.
Man, that does me a true honor. And man, you look about to make me cry, but I feel that, man. Thank you so very much, brother.
I appreciate
man,
you.
I'm totally glad that you're here. And yeah, I'm really glad that you're here. So first off, man, just introduce yourself to people. Let them know where you're at, what you do, and the work that you're involved in as well.
Yeah, sure. So I am, my title is Director of Spiritual and Leadership Development, and I'm at ShoreLine City Church in Dallas, Texas. So Pastors Earl and Onika McClellan are the pastors there. They're two of the most wonderful, kind, loving, gracious, cheerful people that I know. If you go and check out the website and you listen to some of the sermons, what you're seeing, like that's the way they act behind the scenes. Like that's not a
good to know too.
Yeah. If you pop in one of our staff meetings, if you go to coffee with me and they're there, that what you see on stage is exactly what you see in front of you, just without a microphone.
That is good to hear. To hear that people are the same behind the scenes as they are on the scenes. And we're going to actually, that's funny. We'll get into a little bit of that on tonight about just congruence.
Yeah.
And but the reason I brought you on, Garland, is because obviously we are in a actually think I remarked this to you yesterday that we really find ourselves in the middle of two pandemics at the same time. You have COVID-19, and then this whole pandemic really of, if you will, racial injustice. And we're in a unique time in history and space that we've obviously never been before. And one of the, I think, benefits that this pandemic has offered us is, whether intentional or not, times to reflect, to think, to process, and so one of the significant things I think that's coming up for people is purpose. Like, they're having time to evaluate where they're at in their stage of life, and for some people, they're measuring it against a time frame that they probably thought they should have already reached, or they feel some sense of, I won't say comfort, but they feel like there's obviously more that they really haven't stepped into more fully what they're called to do. And so I thought this conversation around purpose would just be incredibly helpful to help people kind of filter and break through the noise, if you will. And so my first question tonight to you, and oh man, I see some of our friends are already on. Cynthia, Lanita, your wife, obviously. Stan, good to see you, brother. Thank you for joining us, man.
And Eric, love you both. Two dear friends. Yeah.
Stan is in Colorado now. I'm gonna have to come visit you, Stan.
He's here in Dallas. He's vacationing, I suspect.
Oh, okay, you just vacation. All right, next time we'll go
for the Lord in Buena Vista, Colorado.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you guys for joining. So this first question I wanted to ask is centered around, and our good friend Cynthia, is what are some things that you believe people should probably be thinking about, reflecting on as it relates to purpose in this season that we're in of COVID-19 and all the other events that are going on in our country at this moment in time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm going to start by defining a few terms. When I worked, prior to becoming on staff at ShoreLine City Church, I worked at Dallas Theological Seminary as an academic advisor and then an internship. So I had the, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up conversation a lot. And I actually asked that question, what do you want to do when you grow up? Which I think is a perfectly reasonable thing to ask, even to an adult, because I think we're all kind of figuring it out. Yeah. And that would be the first thing is I think we're all figuring it out and it changes over time. So be okay with that. Yeah. I think our society communicates to us this idea that you're going to turn 18, you're going to know exactly what you're going to do, you're going to major, and then from there, you're going to have your career, and that's going to be the thing you do, and everything is certainty. I don't know about you, but the life I live, pretty much I'm trying to figure it out as I go along. Yeah. Now a lot of it is really the process of listening to and following God's direction in the context of community, and according to design, and that's really what I'm going to talk about. But it's really we're all on this journey, and I think you have to think about that as a journey. I'm going to. Calling and vocation are two terms that get thrown out a lot. What's your calling? So I would argue that I think everybody has the same calling. Our vocation is different. So our calling, the Westminster Confession of Faith, shout out to all the nerds in the audience. The shorter confession says, what is the chief end of man? That is the first question. What is your purpose? What is the chief end of man? And the answer is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Wow, yeah. So another way to put it, in the words of, I just blanked on his name, is to know God and to make him known. Yes. So if you want to, I'm a nerd, so I like the Westminster Confession, to glorify God and enjoy him forever, but I think to know God and make him known works as well. So I think all of us, especially if you're a believer, actually, all of us, that's our purpose. It's just a question of whether you're embracing that or not. Our calling is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Wow. Yes. Our vocation is what we do to earn money to glorify God and enjoy him forever.
That's a good distinction, Garland. Yeah. That's a good distinction.
Yeah. And so really, that question of what do you want to be when you grow up is really a question of, well, what's the best vocation that in this season is going to best fit with, and how do I go about figuring out what that fit is, what that best alignment is? Yes. And so that's in the process of being an academic advisor and overseeing internships and talking to a lot of future pastors and future ministers and future professionals about what they're going to do, is that vocational discernment that so it's not a magical formula per se, but I do find sometimes it's helpful to, in the noise of life, to figure out lanes and patterns so that way you can kind of get a handle.
Talk to us, brother.
Okay. So in that vein, I'm going to give you 3 kind of handles to hold on to that can help you start to answer the question of vocational discernment, of how do I go about glorifying God and enjoying him forever. So handle number 1 is you. Handle number 2 is community. And handle number 3 is God. So that's you, community, and God.
That's good.
So let's talk about the you handle. So the you handle is, I believe there's a God. I believe that God has designed you. And I believe that God intends to do things through you. So you have a purpose in life. And so on that basis, my thought is, okay, if God is a designer, what is the designer's intent? Design reveals the designer's intent. So we need to study our design to understand what it is that intends for us. So that would be, what are your values? What are the things that bother you? When you turn on the news and something happens on the news, what is it that makes you go, ooh, or makes you just sit up and take notice? Is it a sense of justice? It is a sense of wonder, of exploration. What are the things that are important to you? What are of value to you?
Yes.
second part, it would be what drives you? What are the ways in which you engage with the world? What are the common things? If you look over your life history and job history, what are the things that are common to you? So I'm gonna use myself as an example because I know my own story, so it's really helpful. But one of the things that happened to me, this is graduating college, and so I was becoming more active in my church, and my mom said, well, you seem to have this gift of teaching. And I was like, no, I don't. That doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? And so she pointed out to me that in every job I had had since high school, I had either been a trainer or the trainer of trainers in every single job that I had ever had.
Wow.
My first job was at a Chuck E. Cheese. And so I was going for, it was called a blue shirt. So you have the red shirts, and then when you were going to become a trainer, you became a blue shirt. So I was doing my blue shirt test, and I rewrote the training manual for that store because the corporate training manual didn't fit.
I love it. I love it.
And I thought that was normal because that's what normal people do, right? Well, no, normal people don't do that. But people gifted with education, people with a drive to help others learn, they do that.
Yeah.
So that was so that education piece has followed me in every job I have, even now in my current role.
Yeah.
I describe my role as I'm the pipes behind the walls. You don't see what I do on a Sunday morning typically. But what I do is I do a lot of behind the scenes leadership development. So staff development and volunteer leaders. I create programs, but they're all things that tap into this educational bent that I have. So what are your values? What bothers you? What are your drives? How do you engage with the world? And then the third one would be just, what are your interests? What are you reading? What do you find reading? What do you find that you continue to explore? But that combination of your interests, your values, and your drives begins to give you a picture of kind of how you're designed and the kinds of things that you're best suited to do. So that's the you piece. I will pause there. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. So two comments I want to make. One, obviously, guys, as you're listening, drop your questions below because we're going to have time at the end to take your questions and answer those. So as we're conversating, drop those questions below. The comment I think that is really so important about you is it's so significant in that I think it's really sometimes in our if you will, in our Christian world, we sometimes, or in a lot of ways, I see us placing less emphasis on self sometimes because we think it's selfish. And to a degree, I see the point in that you want to be too self-absorbed. But we oftentimes, I think that short circuits us from really asking some introspective, reflective questions that get us to the point where we're actually able to see what God has already planted inside us and to follow those unctions, those promptings, if you would. Because I do believe that obviously God, he speaks through his word, but I believe he also speaks through those impressions. And those impressions oftentimes come as a response to ask us discerning and asking those questions that you just said as it relates to you. And so that kind of positions us to really, if you will, give us some data to help us really discern what our purpose, what our assignment is. So I think that was spot on.
Yeah, 100%. And, and this is where so what's interesting is, so when James and I first started seminary, I was in a phase where I was exploring the idea of counseling. So when I went on my seminary journey, I was thinking about counseling. Now, James, you were already in the counseling program, but we took some classes, a few classes together. And in that process, so I had in the back of my head that there was this education thing that I knew was important to me, but I also knew I had this talent and this interest in counseling. And so I was like, okay, is that where God's pulling me? And as I began to go down that journey, what happened to me was I started to realize I'm in these education spaces and I'm looking at all these philosophers and theorists in education. And then I'm taking this counseling course and I'm like, these are the same people. Some of these names are the same people. And it realized that education and counseling are the same, like they're cousins. They start with the same family. They just go in slightly different branches and directions. And so part of my journey was realizing there were some skills that I needed from counseling, but I didn't necessarily need to be a full-blown counselor. And that's leading me to, so one of the things that I did is in order to gain some of the skills of counseling is I began to study personality profiles and personality inventory. You're more than a series of letters on a page. You're more than a number on a page. Yeah. But I think understanding those patterns begins to help you see that individual design about how God's putting you. And I think to the degree that they're helpful and they're accurately describing, that's the degree to which they can be helpful and help you discern that you part of the equation.
Yeah. You know, this reminds me of when I got ready to prepare for undergrad. I'd always had a love for business and interacting with people. And so I took this bookkeeping course in high school. And, you know, it was cool. I enjoyed it. And I was kind of new in my faith, if you will. So I don't really give much prayerful thought as to, you know, what my major should be when I went into undergrad. And so I chose accounting because I thought, you know, this is going to give me a good mix in between business and people. So I get to the university. My professors are great. The curriculum is cool. It's not significantly hard, but I started having a conversation with myself, as I call it, because the organization that I was serving with at the time for accountants, these we call them the public four, the big four now. They would come and take us out to eat and show us the ropes, kind of what we were going to be doing once we got outside of undergrad. And so I started to get this real sense of, as they were taking us out, that I was not going to be able to get as personally involved with people as I desired. And so I'm having this conversation with myself, hadn't shared it with anybody. And maybe a couple of weeks in the middle of that, we're scheduled to be at this conference in Atlanta for National Association of Black Accountants. And I get there, man, and the first night of the conference, the keynote speaker is speaking, man, and he's so passionate. I mean, like so passionate that it like unsettles me because I'm like, I'm about to devote my life to this career of accounting. And I nearly have half as much passion as this guy has. And I'm like, man, so this just like really unsettled me. So I'll get back from the conference, and it just so happens that the pastor at the time of the church that I was belonged to, he was teaching on purpose and passion. And, you know, he defined passion as something that you love so much, where it came to the point where if it came to the point where you had to do it for free, you would do it. But because you do it so well, people reward you for doing it. And so I really had to ask myself the question in that moment, you know, if it came to the point where I had to do accounting for free, would I do it? And obviously, because I'm sitting right here, you guys know the answer is no. But what had really jumped in my mind, Garland, was counseling, and I didn't know all the ins and outs of what that meant. I just remember distinctly at this time I was a junior. I would often go to the library, and I went to a HBCU. So the way our library was structured is if you didn't want to do any work You would go to the fourth floor. That was like the socializing floor. And, you could just kid out or whatever. Second floor, if you had some amount of work that you needed to be done, but it wasn't a specific deadline, you kind of can still socialize a little bit. You go to the second floor. And if you had something like seriously you need to get done, you would go to the third floor. And that's where I often went. And for some providential, at the point I was saying, but I know it was Providence, people would often come by and ask for help on homework. And before you know it, like 20 minutes later, we're into these kind of life conversations about just deep personal things, trauma, things related to that. And I offer my feedback, and I always went away from those experiences like, man, I felt like I hit my sweet spot. And so, a lot of time has gone by, but I often reflect back on the experience because sometimes I think we downplay our traits, our those things that are within this wheelhouse, as you described, of you. And because we don't perceive them as significant, we don't pay attention to them. And then a big part, which I want to ask you about before we move on to that next lane, is I think trauma has a lot to do with how we perceive our value as you. And that trauma, obviously shows up in our physical body in a lot of ways. But I want you to speak to that, kind of how trauma can impact us from really seeing ourselves in a positive and an accurate light of who we are.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think one of the things about trauma, and we could probably have a whole hour-long conversation on trauma.
On that itself.
But one of the things you have to remember about trauma, especially early childhood trauma, actually creates not only mental, psychological changes, but actually begins to get hardwired into you. I love what Steneric just said.
Yes.
The score.
Yes.
There's some things that get hardwired. You literally have biological changes. For those of you who don't know, when people experience PTSD, what's happening is the event that reminds them. So you have a present event that's triggering memory of a past event. Well, in that moment, they're basically back in the same spot that they were when the original trauma happened. Like the same chemicals are going, the same neural biological processes are going. It's as if they're back in the same moment. They're literally biologically stuck there. And so you've got to do things. And the point being is that in some ways what trauma is, it hardwires you to a past event. And so you've got to deconstruct that past event in order to really be able to fully experience your present you. That's the shortest version I give without taking another 10 minutes.
That's good. Man, that was so succinct. I would have definitely said that in 20 minutes. And because I think that is oftentimes, the thing that really prohibits us from moving forward. As I always see, it's always say that life is what we think about and what we pay attention to, we become. And so whatever is in the forefront of our mind, if you will, if we consistently give energy to that, then we eventually become that. And so, like you said, because the body keeps score, which I think his name is Diesel Van Buck. Can't quote me on the name, but Stan, if you know the name, drop it for me, brother. One of my favorite books. In that, because I think that is because the body keeps that score, if you will, and we hold that trauma. Like you said, it prohibits us from really accurately, presently seeing our current life in the most empowering light. And so I'll leave it at that, because that can, and my wife said, you should do that next week, because that could be a whole conversation about how trauma impacts purpose.
So I do want to move on. So we talked about this U handle. So I think the second handle to look at is the community handle. And so when I'm looking at community, that could be broad. So that could be a church-based community. It could be your friend group. It could be professional community. But I think whomever you kind of self-identify with as being part of them, whoever them is for you, and that could be several thems. So you could have several communities that you participate. But as you're looking at your community, some of the questions you should be asking is, where's my community affirming me? So one of the things for me as a teacher, as my mom brought that point up, I started realizing all these points in my life where people said, Garland, you like broke that down for me. You're so good at taking something really complex and making it simple. Even I've had occasion where I was somebody on a subject that I myself was not an expert in. And yet I was able to help. So there was something happening there that the community was telling me, no, you're good at this. You're doing something that other people aren't able to do as well as you. So where are they affirming you? Where are they stopping you? You don't know you're really good at teaching. Your organizational skills, man, your desk is a mess. Administration is not your gift. All right. Yeah. And then where are they giving you opportunities? So in my former job as an internship person, I would hear people say things like, well, I'm called to be a preacher. Well, how do you know? Well, I'm really good at preaching and, I've got good public speaking skills. Okay, is your church asking you to preach? Well, no. Okay, then you're not called to preach.
Yeah.
It's that simple. If your community is not giving you the opportunity to exercise the gift, I'm not saying that you're not gifted, but I'm suggesting that maybe now's not the time for that gift to come out. Now, there's a bunch of whys for that. It could be that you're just not ready. It could be that there's some other skills that you need to take on. It could be that you need to learn some humility. It could be that it's just not the right timing for the message that you have. So there's a bunch of different reasons. It's not always. Sometimes what I see people do, especially if they're believers, is they go to, well, I must have done something wrong. I must have sinned. No, not necessarily. David was anointed king when he was young, and yet it's years before he actually becomes king and exercises that gift or exercises that calling. It's years before the community affirms him as king. It doesn't mean that David did anything wrong, and I don't know that I would not say that the biblical story suggests that David did something wrong that delayed his stepping into his kingship. I think it was just not the time for it. So that community would be, again, where are they affirming you? Where are they stopping you or redirecting you? And where are they giving you opportunity? That gives you an indicator of that's your second handle you want to look at.
That's good. I think a lot of more people would probably benefit from having people who have the wisdom enough to say that, this might not be the best time for this, or just because I think it really, when people help to give us constructive criticism, and it's coming from community. That's why I think it's so important for like this community aspect is when people have built up, as I call it in my line of work, relational equity. Then when they're able to say these things that may on the surface may not seem affirming, it really, if they're saying it love, I think it helps to redirect. I'll say it this way: when I give people feedback, it's in order to help push them to what I see their greatest contribution can be. And it's just like, when we go to the bowling alley, and at least for the kids who play, when we play on the kiddie lane, we put up those guards, and those guards help set those parameters.
Yep.
So that regardless of how the kid throws the ball, they're guaranteed to knock over at least one pin, if not more.
Right.
And our community kind of helps to affirm and balance, if you will, where we need to be balanced at. But I think it just takes us having that outlet, having that community to help us move forward.
So in this current season, what's interesting is, again, personalizing. So we've got COVID going on, and then you have the George Floyd thing going on. So in COVID, our church and being on staff of the church, we've had to pivot very quickly. And if you're a pastor, if you're a senior pastor in this moment, you have no idea the volume of decisions that senior pastors are having to make right now. And so you should cut your pastor a little bit of slack. They're trying. Yeah. We're trying. So you've got COVID going on, and then there's this layer of George Floyd going on, in which I'm personally dealing with my stuff related to that as a Black man. But then I'm also having to take on a pastoral role to shepherd other people through it. And then I'm also having to take on my very specific role on staff and do like staff development related to that. And then on top of the normal amount of pastoral counseling that I've had to do, and then also we've been tapped to be resources for other institutions. So finally Monday, my back started hurting. And I finally made a connection where I realized that a lot of my intensity, when it hits a certain point, I actually start to embody that intensity. And so I think that's one of the explanations as to why my back is hurting. So I took a pill right now. I haven't taken the muscle relaxer because I'm going to be on a muscle relaxer having this conversation. That probably wouldn't be well for anybody. But after this conversation, I will. But point being is that sometimes, so when I reached out to my community and I was talking to one of my fellow pastors, Andrew Scott and Hannah Scott, and he pointed out to me, he's like, we've been through the same thing when we hit certain points that a lot of times it'll manifest in these ways. So here my community is affirming like, I'm having this individual experience, but it's being affirmed by my community. Because
it's, like you said, and it's been a racially tense time, and especially obviously both of us being Black men, we both have Black boys. Like you said, we hold on this aspect of trauma, and sometimes even as a counselor, sometimes I catch how trauma impacts me sometimes too late. And one of the things I always want to say about trauma is, and I've always said this, I will continue to say this, is because we in our society and even in church have such a narrow view of trauma. It keeps us from being able to actually accurately identify it, because we only have, in most cases, created space for trauma as it relates to those who've been physically abused, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse. But we don't consider neglect as a form of trauma, withholding affection, all these things there, what we call kind of developmental traumas, if you will, that impact us, our body and our focus. And so I was sharing with my wife that one of the things I've been struggling for this last couple of weeks is focus. And I said, I feel like I'm at a place where, I have a clear sense of vision of where I'm at, what I want to do, but I'm having trouble focusing and just connecting my mind with my heart. And I realized after actually listening to one of a therapist friend of mine's, she was saying how, watching these images, these videos, and hearing news can be re-traumatizing in a lot of ways. And like as soon as she said it, it kind of clicked for me that what I want to set a little bit more parameters around when I was going to watch news and how I was going to filter it in because it was affecting my body and affecting how I showed up. And that's why I said it's so, trauma just has so much impact on how we show up, obviously on a day-to-day basis. But as it relates to this conversation on purpose, I felt like it was really significantly affecting me moving forward in some of the goals that I've had recently. And like you said, having to have these conversations. So I'm really, I didn't realize that use so much emotional energy, if you will, in this moment of racial tension, having conversations, processing just in my own psyche what's going on, and having to do all that, manage responsibilities, and keep a sense of vision and a focus on what I believe God has called me to do. Exactly. And so thank God for our community because, if I didn't have that aspect, I would definitely kind of fall to the wayside because I think our brother Ramel Graves is up here, one of our the original three, as we call it.
Yep.
And, we pray every week, hold each other accountable, and things of that nature. But just having that moment to process every week, and I think we'll probably get into this. If we don't take time to process in our community, really what we're sensing, what we're feeling, what we're emoting, if you will, there's some of the things as it relates to purpose don't really become clear to us because we don't have the space to do that. And as all this I said, identity is formed in community. Like we need this sense, we need the community because we're, biologically wired for love and belonging and connection. And just the way God has set this thing up, that our purpose, us flourishing in our purpose does not happen outside of community. Just really going back to the Genesis narrative, I always
we were created for relationships.
We were created for relationships, and God could have just easily made mankind by himself, but he said, let us make man in our image. And so and we're going definitely nerdy seminary here, but, inviting Jesus and the Holy Spirit in this process, the Spirit to join in this process, kind of this communal process of creating mankind. Yeah. And so this community aspect is really important. I'm going to ask this question to you, Garland, that we already have, and then we can move it to that last lane that you want to talk about.
Yeah, generational hurt as its connection to trauma. So again, it's a whole question that really could be a whole discussion right here. Yeah. So as it relates to our discussion with regard to kind of this idea of calling and vocational discernment and understanding purpose, what I will say is I think one of the struggles that Black people and many other people of color, so it's not just a Black thing, I think it's people of color as well, are dealing with is this concept that we've felt like we've been kicked out of or not allowed to enter into white spaces. And so therefore we've been disconnected from the white community. I could say so much more on that, but let me just park it there for a second and say that what that does is if you're understanding that the way we understand vocation is to be part of the community, then what's happening is the disconnection from part of the human race is actually creating the ability to walk into the purpose that God has created for us. Yeah, and so then you see the generational effects of that over time that happen. So again, that is a really incomplete answer.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that we might need to have a conversation on trauma.
Yeah, we might have to follow up with this conversation.
Yeah.
We want to commit to doing that. We might actually have to do that, you guys. So you guys told us.
I'm not an expert in trauma. I have my own trauma story, and I would be willing to talk through kind of how I've worked through my own trauma.
Yeah.
Okay,
we'll do that.
Okay, so first handle was the you and your individual design. Second one is the community. So the third handle I'm going to give you is God. So the God part, that God space, the first is when you're thinking about calling, when you're thinking about vocational discernment, what does the Bible say? So God has revealed through the Word, through the Bible, and so the Bible doesn't speak to everything. That's not what it's designed to do, but it does speak to some very particular things about what we do, how we should live our lives, and so therefore, we as Christians need to be consulting people who understand the Bible and seeking the Bible to understand how it applies to us in every moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So the second space in that God space is, what is conventional wisdom saying? So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. There's another statement, all truth is God's truth, meaning if it's true, it comes from God because God is truth, is the source of truth. And so therefore, there's some sense in which we can and should understand that God does reveal his will through the wisdom that is in the world, in the universe. And so what is conventional wisdom telling you about what you should be doing? And then third one I say is circumstance. So these are the things that we can't control. These are not the opportunities that we can create for ourselves, but this is more like you get on an elevator and you have a conversation with a stranger, and 30 seconds later, you're walking out with a business card and a contact to apply for a job.
Wow. Yeah.
You can't control that. You can't generate that. You can't produce that. That is a divinely oriented appointment that God has orchestrated.
Yes.
So that's the God part is kind of, you're kind of looking for and seeing where God is moving, and you're listening for how God has communicated about what you should be doing when he is moving. That's the God part. And it's the one that's the easiest to articulate, but it's the hardest to hear sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. My, this whole aspect of involving in God in our stories and discerning purpose of it, like you said, it's simple to articulate, but sometimes hard to nail just in our own life. What do you think? And you've already, I think, given one. That was just kind of one example of being in the elevator and coming out of the elevator with a business card and someone helping you set up an interview. What are some of those practical ways you think that God speaks to us, gives impressions to us as it relates to this idea of purpose?
So I'm actually going to tell you a story again, because I'm talking about me, because it's not about me, because I know my story. So I met my wife the first day on campus, literally. I was coming out of the student center. She was coming in. I thought she was a student. Turned out she had already been there, and she worked with me. She gave me business Lanita response. Lanita's my wife. She gave me her business response. I basically asked her questions until she gave me a real response. And then I said, "Thank you, have a good day." So basically, I annoyed my wife, and that is how I met her. And I've been doing it for 11 years. It's
11 years.
But how we began to, when we realized that something was happening, was I was having she worked in the advising office. We were going back to where we lived on campus, and she said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, it was just something that pricked me that said, "Be honest," that I can't really explain. And I said, I've never told anybody this, but in my heart of hearts, if money weren't an object, I would love to start a school. And I have very strong ideas about what curriculum looks like, and kind of how it would have an integrated curriculum and what the classrooms look like. And I wanted to be connected to the community, but I don't understand enough about that to know how that works. And she got this funny look on her face, and I prodded, and she said, I've always had a dream, and it's to open up a school, and I have very strong ideas about how it should be connected to the community, but I don't know anything about curriculum. And then we were like, huh. All right. So clearly God is doing something here.
Yeah.
And so out of that moment actually became a series of conversations really that surrounded the school, but began to help. We began to dream together. We began to do research. We began to idea share, and we began to envision, well, what could this look like? And how could it work? So it started with a moment that I couldn't have created because I have no game. I'm not that good. My wife will affirm this. So it started with this moment that I couldn't have created, and I don't think she could have either. But it blossomed into something else and something broader. Now, we still haven't started that school, and I don't know that that's necessarily ultimately where God is leading us. I think there's something broader going on. That's a whole different conversation.
And then this is the thing that you just can't explain away. It's just like these divine encounters that I believe God positions us for and sets us up. And I think one of the reasons to speak to, I think why he does that is in our journey of purpose, finding out what we are, what would be the best use of our God-given talent, skills, and abilities, and how to steward those. Sometimes in the process of doing that, we have doubts about our proficiency, our competence, and having these moments that you just described remind us that the path that we've chosen and engaged in was not a path that we just solely chose for ourselves, by ourselves, but it was backed by the affirmation of our community and what we consider God's hand intervening and directing us to this specific path. And that gives us, at least for me, gives me great confidence in knowing that I'm doing what I need to be doing and I'm where I need to be, if you will.
Yeah, and so what I would say is I think vocation is when you and community and God come into alignment. When if you can think of those as a Venn diagram, again, nerds, shout out to the nerds in the room. When those three kind of overlap, where they overlap is where you want to be.
Yeah.
Where your individual design, your community engagement, and God's directive in your life are all in alignment. Yeah. And the more those are in alignment, the more you're going to feel a sense of purpose and feel like you're where you should be. Yeah. And when one or more of those go out of alignment, the more things are going to start to feel weird. Which brings up another point. You will have multiple vocations, multiple callings in your life, multiple vocations in your life. Meaning, because your interests will change, you will change. Yeah. Your community will change. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the wisdom that applied today doesn't apply tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. So these circles are constantly going in and out of alignment, and what you're trying to do is to keep them as close to alignment as possible.
Yeah. What do you say to a person that's listening? And I want to ask this question as it relates to alignment, who they're listening to our conversation and they're like, man, they are saying everything that I have been feeling for a while right now, but they just didn't know how to articulate it. And so now they know the light has came on, the light bulb has came on for them, and they're thinking about their next steps from this conversation that we're having now. What would be some of those next steps that you would recommend for someone that's listening to take?
So I would say pick up one of those handles. Here, mm-hmm. What I mean by that is if you probably, as you're sitting here, something's off, but you can't put your finger on it, or you mm-hmm. can't. It's just like I can't quite. I just know it's off. It doesn't feel right. All right. So look at each of your lanes, and begin to ask yourself. This is where where this COVID season is actually an opportunity for us to do. It's giving us space to do a lot of self-reflection without a lot of the noise of busyness. So I think take advantage of the opportunity. So look in your U lane. Does your U lane fit with what you're doing right now? Or what does fit and what doesn't? Look in your community lane, because is your community, maybe the job's a good fit, but you're just doing it in the wrong community, and maybe really the problem is you need to find a different community to do the thing you're doing.
That's good.
Whereas the U lane might be, maybe you're a worker bee, but you need to be a queen bee.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're a queen bee, but you need to go back to being a worker bee. So that third lane, the God lane, is again, it's the easiest one to talk about, but sometimes it's a little bit harder to focus on, because so much of it is tied to just where are you spiritually, and is your current circumstance such that it's pulling you away from really connecting to God.
Yeah. Good.
And I think can I theologically nerd out for a second?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's where I think your theological tradition, your church tradition, somewhat shapes how you think about this. So if you come from like the high church late community, so like your Episcopalians, your Lutherans, your Roman Catholics, you're primed to think of vocational discernment as, well, if my community tells me to do it, then that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
That's kind of what your tradition tells you. If you come out of like the Bible church background, maybe a little bit of Presbyterian, you're probably a little bit more primed to say, okay, what's my individual design?
Yeah.
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And if you come out of a little bit more like Pentecostal charismatic spirit-led background, you're going to say, well, what's the Spirit leading me to do? So your lane's going to push you more in the God, meaning that because in each of those, whatever your lane is pushing you toward, it means that your inclination is to ignore the other two. And so you've got to put yourself back into like you've got to reach into the handles and pick up the handles and ignoring. Now, I'm generalizing. This is a very broad brush I'm painting with.
But it's very helpful and probably gives people cues that they may not have paid attention to before up until this moment to see, you know what, Garland is probably right here. Like in their initial experience, if they think about it, kind of will probably validate what you're saying in this moment. And like you said, we're making a general broad stroke here. Don't hold us accountable, but I think that was a great way to articulate that. I have a couple moments for a couple questions. My wife asked one, which I do want to ask because we both have children. Her question was, what advice would you give parents about preparing their kids for purpose and vocation? So this is I want our audience to benefit from this question, but it is a bit of a selfish motivation because I'm married to this lady right here. And I would love to hear what you have to say on that regard too.
I think that's a good question. I think you've got to, as a parent, you need to study your child. So there's so many, I don't know about you, but my natural instincts are of a parent are to get my child to do what I think he should do.
Yeah.
And I think as a Christian parent, teaching your child to obey is a very important thing, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah.
I think you have to recognize and remember you are being asked to steward a life. And so therefore, as a steward, meaning that this precious thing does not belong to you, you've got to ask yourself, what did the Creator intend for this person? So what are their gifts? What are their inclinations? And how can you help shape and mold and direct them toward the way that God has designed them? So my son a couple of things I've noticed about him is he's actually pretty funny. Now I know everybody thinks their kid's like amazing, but I'm watching my child, and he really has his finger on the pulse of like things that kids his age find really funny. Now I personally don't find it funny, but the thing about humor is it's generational. So I'm not going to find the things he finds funny.
Yeah.
But I'm watching other people react to him and other kids react to him, and they think he's hilarious. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So clearly there's some kind of thing here. And I'm not saying he needs to be a comedian, but those skills that make him instinctively good at it, those are skills that I need to bring out and foster. I also noticed that he actually has a really a rather healthy developed eye for both color matching and for patterns. So like, for example, I was putting on a tie one day, and I said, hey, I was being funny. I said, hey, Luke, what do you think about the tie? And he looked at it and he goes, well, it should have some yellow polka dots on it. And I looked at it and I was like, he's actually right. It does. And then there's been several times where I've tested where I'm like, hey, Luke, should I wear this or wear that? I'll say, hey, this coat or this. And he picks, and usually what he picks, like I'll run it by Lenita, and Lenita's like, yeah, he's right. Like, so there's something, I don't know how he developed it, but he has an artist's eye for patterns and for colors. Yeah. That's something that I have a responsibility to foster because there's clearly a talent there. Yeah. So I think it's study your child and view your role as a stewardship role, not as a dictator, meaning you've got to shape and mold them according to the pattern God has set and bring out the things that you see there.
Man, that's good. This is me and my wife, like I said, are doing this now, watching our son Avery, is about to be 5. And, do really believe everything that you just said. And I think us exposing him to environments to kind of watch how he reacts and responds is really important. Man, this conversation has been incredibly helpful, Garland. And I'm glad that you joined me to have it. We definitely have to have a follow-up conversation as it relates to trauma. And if you're listening either by live or replay, and honestly you need some help processing trauma and how that impacts you, I want you to go to my website, jamesperkins.help, and click Talk with James. You can schedule a time to talk with me, and we'll go from there. But I really think this aspect of trauma is really important as it relates to us really kind of discerning our purpose and really stepping more fully into what God has called us to do. Garland, for people that were listening and they want to stay in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way for, and first of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure hanging out with you. As always. I hate that we're in separate states, but I know we're both doing exactly what God has called us to do. So I'm just looking forward to the day when we're back in the same city again. If you want to reach out to me, email me, garland.dunlap@shorelinecity.church. So my first name and last name, garland.dunlap@shorelinecity.church. Shoreline City, one word, .church.
Perfect. And we'll pin this in the comments for people to be able to contact you. Guys, thank you so very much for attending tonight. We always like to give a gift to our listeners. And so, again, if you have this link below, we're going to put this in the comments. But if you just want to go there now, it's perfectly fine. We have a gift for you. Actually, it gives you access to a course we created called 5 Days to Your Best You, which is simply a set of 5 mindset practices that we know are incredibly important, especially as it relates to this conversation of purpose. And so if you want to engage in that, please do so. James Perkins at Help, Wellness Gift. And again, thank you so very much for attending tonight. If you listen to this by replay again, let us know where you're chiming in from. And until next week, thank you so very much. Garland, thank you, man, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on next week. Everybody have a great weekend.